Good evening, everyone. So glad to see everybody who has gathered here for today's session. We have come to another chapter of the webinar series organized by the Global Youth Diversity Network to celebrate the International Day for Biological Diversity, which was on the past 22nd of this month. We, Global Youth Diversity Network, have been continuing our journey for more than 10 years by raising the voice of the youth to save biodiversity and encouraging young people to conserve our green planet. Also, Gibbon has been serving as the official representative of the youth at the CBD negotiations. Global Youth Diversity Network is one of the biggest youth-led organizations in the world, and we have 50 plus chapters with more than 1.2 million members around the world. For today's lecture, we have selected a very crucial topic on biodiversity. We all know forests are like the heart of biodiversity. Unfortunately, many forests are being cut down in the name of various developments around the world, even as we speak. And this has led to many destructive impacts on our planet, from dramatic climate change to habitat loss of species, driving as a vast number of species to brink of extinction. This situation is of no difference in Sri Lanka as well. So we thought of talking about what we can do against deforestation and to conserve biodiversity as youth. So we have Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha with us today to talk about this vital matter. He is one of founding member and chief organizer of Rainforest Protectors of Sri Lanka. We warmly welcome you, sir, for today's session, and I invite you to share your knowledge with us on youth-led conservation efforts to combat deforestation and promote biodiversity conservation in Sri Lanka. Sir, now you can share your screen.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Can somebody tell me if everything is fine?
Yes, sir. It's clear and fine.
Okay. So, yeah, good evening, everyone. And it's a very timely incident that happened. If you can see my screen right now, my video, what you find here is a little I think a small moth, small butterfly on my hand, and it's just landed on my hand about a minute ago. Talking about biodiversity, I thought that was a very interesting beginning altogether. Now, that also taught me of changing what I was initially thinking of talking to you, of the importance of biodiversity and the fact that how conservation efforts in terms of deforestation and in terms of regenerating and in terms of various other different concepts and contexts can be brought into the picture and make you understand how important it is for us to conserve biodiversity, and the fact that how youth and how in general public can engage in this endeavor. I always believe the fact that we cannot do any kind of conservation as long as you understand the importance of conservation, importance of the habitats, importance of the planet Earth altogether, and importance of where you live. In this case, Sri Lanka, for instance. In this case, maybe your home garden. In this case, maybe your village. In this case, maybe your specific climatic zone that you live in. As long as you understand the area, the importance of the habitat, importance of ecosystems wherever you live in, you cannot basically think of any conservation or think of trying to engage in conservation activities or giving leadership to conservation activities. So this butterfly somehow taught me in addressing some of these little things that you encounter in everyday life, in your area, in your house, in your village, vicinity, workplace, is very critical and should get us thinking. Coming back to the point I mentioned, that the fact that we cannot do any conservation without understanding where you live is very important. And therefore, I want to begin with my presentation. And the first bit of my presentation is based on a general presentation that I'm usually doing. And I will move on to more biodiversity focus few slides thereafter. And just let me know if you can see my screen.
Still not. All right, we can see
Is it. It's clear. Is it on presentation mode?
No, it's still not.
Is it now on presentation mode?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Now, like I mentioned, we cannot think of doing any kind of conservation, or we cannot do any kind of activism in terms of environmental activism, or we cannot think of biodiversity conservation as long as if you do not understand the importance of the country you live in. So I take my first bit to explain why Sri Lanka is an amazing place in the world, and why you should be aware of the environmental resources and the natural resources that we have abundantly have in this country. And when you know that, you will know the ecosystem services and the important biodiversity aspects of the country, which we must protect and conserve for future generations, and how the youth can get engaged in this whole process. Sri Lanka is, as you know, is 65,610 square kilometers, a small island where you have 8 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This is, for a small country of this size, is a very big number compared to the other countries in the world. And also, out of these 8 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, 2 are natural World Heritage Sites. One is Singharaja Rainforest, and the other one is Central Hills, Knuckles, and this whole area, which we call Central Hills. Now, these are 2 main world natural natural heritage sites we have. And within this, you have it's more than 22 national parks now. Actually, we have 1,330 kilometers of coastline, and we have many water bodies, rivers, waterfalls, etc. It's important that you know what the country is, what the country has to offer, and why Sri Lanka is so unique, and why we are called a biodiversity hotspot. And as you would also know, biodiversity hotspot does not mean it's always good. It is also a bad message, because biodiversity hotspots means that we have so much of diversity, and also at the same time they are threatened immensely from the actions, including development. And as you would know, when now the world is speaking about sustainable development, world is talking about environmental conservation, world is talking about equal rights to rivers and trees, forests, they making them entities on their own so that they have their own right. But Sri Lanka was actually practicing some of these concepts thousands of years ago. If you look at Mihintale, is the world's first sanctuary in the world in the recorded history, and also it has the world's first animal hospital, and some of these things that I would not explain everything, but we had so much of civilization, and some of the environmentally integrated concepts such as Elanga system, where we ensured that all our water is properly conserved, and our dry zone is converted to a wet area, in a sense that we could do paddy cultivation and agricultural activities, and we could have our forests, and we could have our waterways, we could support our aquatic biodiversity, and based on which we supplied our own food, based on which we supplied our transportational requirements, based on which we basically fulfilled biodiversity requirements in terms of helping pollinators and all the other things. We have these concepts within ourselves, within our systems, thousands of years ago. And we had 30,000 man-made irrigation tanks. And this is basically a big wonder if you look at how these tanks were basically placed upon. We basically wanted to make our dry zone, a wet zone, and all the water that's coming from the central hills end up in the wet zone, lowland wet zone area. And we had one of the world's wonder. This is not in the world's wonder list anymore, but we built world's wonders in terms of some of these architectural, man-made structures and things, but also keeping in mind that without disturbing the ecosystems, without disturbing the ecosystem services that were provided by the forests and provided by the other different ecosystems. And we have 103 rivers. In fact, we have a little bit more, but some of these cannot be considered as rivers anymore. But we have 103 rivers. But during, unfortunately, some of the dry seasons now, some of these rivers don't flow. It's so unfortunate. But otherwise, how many countries in the world does have rivers flowing in 360 directions, on all directions? By being a small island, all the rivers starting from the central hills and in the hills in the country are ending up in the sea, and also on their way to the sea, they are filling up all our tanks, providing or making agriculture possible. So what I need to highlight is the fact that that we had this conservation-oriented approach and the development and civilizations placed in the most well-thought-out manner. And we have 8 times of a marine area, and our marine biodiversity is so significant. And we will be talking about it in a more in a bit. And you know, you have many people visiting this country in the past who basically praise this country to be one of the best places in the world. This is Anton Chekhov, what he said. Then there was Ceylon, the place where paradise is located. Here in Paradise, I covered more than 100 miles by railway and was sated up to the neck with palm forest. When we say palm forest, this is not oil palm, this is coconut palm forest, and bronze skin women. And then you had Marco Polo, somebody, a person who had traveled the whole, the majority of the world, and he said, this is undoubtedly the finest island of its size in all the world. So Sri Lanka was named the finest island of its size. So you had many other people. I don't want to basically explain everything, but what George Bernard Shaw said in 2 times about Sri Lanka, and as I mentioned, having many natural world heritage sites and cultural world heritage sites in a small country. And do you know, now we are talking about biodiversity, do you know that Yala National Park, in fact, has the highest density of leopards in any national park in the world? This is basically looking at the size of the, you know what density means, but I'm just explaining. This is looking at the area of the national park and the number of leopards found within. Yala is so famous in the world, and even Vilpattu in 1960s and even 1980s, one of the world's most famous videographers, photographers came to Sri Lanka for the simple fact that it's much easier to find leopards in Sri Lanka than roaming in the national parks in African continent. So it's so significant for us. And as you would know, talking about migratory birds and talking about wetlands, the migratory birds enter from Mana, and then they come to Vilpattu, they come to Nigambu lagoons, they come to Muturajavela lagoon, Muturajavela wetland, they come to Kote Baddagana, they go to Vellangvila Athidiya, from there they go to Kalutara Bolgoda, they go to Ambalangoda wetlands, they go to down south Koggala, elsewhere, and then they go to Boondala, and then from there they go to Kumana, and they can go to Trinco. So this is a entire freshwater and saltwater mangrove network and a wetland network that we had. And that actually is something very significant that we have in this country. And then talking about the national parks, we have plenty. The whole country was actually connected. These are national parks that are demarcated, but I strongly believe if we need to help biodiversity, we need to create a biodiversity network connecting the whole country, the entire island. And then we have this country, different climatic zones, different weather patterns, different rainfall patterns, and you have waterfalls, the country with highest density of waterfalls. That is also another important fact that not many people know by being Sri Lankans. Before we think of conserving our biodiversity, aquatic, marine, aquatic and marine biodiversity, freshwater fish, if you do not know that some of these facts, these are very important, that Sri Lanka has the highest density of waterfalls. That is once again compared to the land size, the most number of waterfalls. Ratnapura district itself, by 2016, they had, by 2015, they had 106 identified waterfalls. Now that is leaving out some of the waterfalls that we have not properly identified. And then we have peaks such as Pidurutalagala, and we also have beautiful beaches all around the country. And we also have many other important ecosystems and marine areas, things that we can promote, things we can protect, like mangrove environments, wetland systems, and rainforests that rainforest protectors have been focusing on initially. We have many rainforests, but everybody knows Singharaja, but not many people know the other rainforests that are either important, equivalent to Singharaja, or if not much better than Singharaja itself. You'll have to bear a few seconds with me, please. Sorry for the disturbance. So I was talking about rainforests, the importance of rainforests, and the fact that
Please stay with us for a little time.
can you hear me? Pasindu, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, you can see my presentation view, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about the disturbance. The line got cut, the network connection issue. There was a connection issue. So we have riverine ecosystems. We have all types of different ecosystems that I'm not going to talk about. But, the trees themselves are different ecosystem that help biodiversity thrive. You know what a tree actually do itself. Trees that helps different types of organisms that not many people know. And when we speak about some of the trees, of course, Sri Lanka holds one of the oldest trees, and I'm not going to talk about most of the other things, but what are more relevant to us, like this. Now, Sri Lanka, when we speak about biodiversity, has the largest marine mammal, a marine animal, and we also have the largest land animal in the world. So, it's not many countries are lucky enough to have the biggest marine mammal and biggest biggest land animal on their country. So we have a complete cross section of biodiversity representation in this country. This is talking about fauna, but if we also look at some of the flora, some of the trees, the plant species, we also have all kinds of plant species that sometimes some of the things that you only find in deserts, and some of the things that you only find in rainforests, and some of the things that you find in coastal mangrove ecosystems, to some of the things that you find in freshwater mangrove ecosystems. So the biodiversity in Sri Lanka is so important and so diverse, and therefore it's only a few countries that are lucky. If you go to some of these European countries, you might only see one type of a monoculture, and you cannot see a proper biodiversity in terms of floral diversity itself in these forests. They are more or less monocultures. But in Sri Lanka, it's not like that, unless and except for British and other colonials that basically invaded our country and changed some of our systems. Like in the case of elephants, the 1,500 Highland elephants were shot dead by the British during their time, and they basically introduced tea. What it did is, like, it took a montane and sub-montane and sometimes cloud forest completely out of the equation, and that basically impacted heavily on the country. And I'm not going to talk about much on other things, but we will also speak about a few, such as the importance of water conservation, and some of the things that we are doing which are impacting biodiversity heavily. And you have different kinds of algae popping up in some of our tanks and rivers and some of the canals, but some of these streams, canals and all of that were actually some time ago, when we were small, for instance, even paddy lands had so much of freshwater fishes, and they're disappearing. And we also do chemical pollution, plastic pollution, and what eventually we don't realize is that we are so lucky to have so much of fresh water anytime we want that we can drink, but we are not as bad as or unfortunate as some of the African kids and African countries, where they have to walk miles and miles to find some water, and that water is also not clean. And we don't really understand the fact that the importance of water, importance of water conserving biodiversity. And as rainforest protectors, there are certain things that we do also, and why I want to highlight on this as well a bit is the fact that so that it's already 8:28. I will take about another 10 minutes so that that some of the actions that we do in terms of biodiversity conservation. We have something called Rainforest Protectors Trust, and I'm representing Rainforest Protectors of Sri Lanka. And we also have this Rainforest Protectors Trust, where we, if you see on this first picture on your left, is land in the border of Singharaja, which we consider as the buffer zone of Singharaja, is cleared for tea cultivation. Initially, what they do is that they log and then they clear that land. They use that land for tea cultivation. Now, what we do is that we basically buy this lands similar to that and conserve. The land you see on the right is one of the land that we conserved, and that is the one that we basically could have deforested, could have been cut down, and which we prevented by purchasing and conserving that are under land trust. So what happens here is that our focus, we have 5 to 6 similar, we have about 5 similar forests that we have preserved, and our focus is to preserve the immediate boundary, the immediate buffer zone of Singharaja by purchasing and conserving currently forested lands. By doing that, we help the migration or the dependence of these biodiversity adjacent to Singharaja, both flora and fauna. For instance, birds. If you take blue magpie loves to live in the immediate zone than the area of Singharaja. So if you do a Singharaja trail, you find blue magpies and all kinds of other native endemic species on the pathway into Singharaja to the second ticket counter, more than beyond that point. So that's a significant indication as to some of the biodiversity that we speak of would live more than in the core zone, they live in the buffer zone. This is one attempt that we have taken in terms of conserving Singharaja's biodiversity, which I want to talk about. This is in front of one of the huge Diprocarpus silenicus. We call them horror tree, one of the rainforest tree species, canopy tree species, pioneer tree species found in Singharaja that we've protected, and this is a land that we've preserved, and this is me in front of some of these trees that we preserved, which otherwise would have been cut down. And it's also very important that you do many awareness sessions as possible to kids, like we do now. Now, I just want to give you a bit of background about biodiversity and why the awareness raising is important. We spoke to some of the kids living in Knuckles and living in Singharaja. The villages we call the border villages of Singharaja and the border villages of Knuckles. And sometimes villages inside Knuckles. There are villages inside Knuckles conservation area. If you would know, there's plenty of villages, small villages, which in our opinion, we believe either must be converted as sample or model villages for conservation, and it has to be completely for conservation, not for any agricultural or any other activity. But unfortunately, I don't think that vision is there with the Department of Forest Conservation or the Ministry of Forest and Wildlife or our Biodiversity Secretariat or our Climate Change Secretariat or any other institution in this country, because these villages in the Knuckles and in Singharaja, for instance, Lankagama, Kudava, and some of these villages like Kadamuduna, that part, Suryakanda, some of these villages, Pitadeniya, these can only be model villages which has both conservation activities, research activities, and tourism happening, and not big economic development or big developmental activities happening. The point I wanted to make is that in Singharaja and in Knuckles both, if you ask them, okay, tell us about 5 native tree species belong to this area, you won't believe the kids in Singharaja would say more or less alien species or invasive species as trees that they identify as tree species found in Singharaja. That in a way explains as to what happens in the border or in these village areas, in terms of there is so much of invasive alien species have basically come and invaded some of these rainforests and some of these forest areas. So that itself is a concern in terms of biodiversity conservation, and we need to put a great emphasis. Now, for instance, they would say Guinea Sapu, Guinea Kuru, and then they would come up with Pinus. Obviously, Pinus is planted in Singharaja, can't help it. And they will say Alice, different kinds of names. So it's not really the answers that we expect. Like, we would expect Tiniadun, like the tree that fell recently in Matugama Kalabana Road. It's one of the very famous trees. Dun trees, Horror, Berelia, Hull, and some of these species that are there in Singharaja, and actually helps people also, because Berelia, Hull, and some of these other species are actually providing food for people. These are traditional food, and those are not actually coming out. So unfortunate, but that's why the awareness is very important. Youth can take in charge of this. Is actually young kids from of course kids who does A-level in Royal College that basically organize this. So actually you can not only school kids but university students and youth in general. Youth means, you know, up to about 35 years. I'm just beyond that age gap, but you know, up to 35 you can you are considered youth. So you can do anything from 15 to 35, some say 18 to 35, but it doesn't matter. As our Sri Lankan Jayatma Liyanage, who is the representative for the UN, head of UN, and youth representative for UN head, as she says very correctly, youth is dependent on the country and dependent on the situation. So probably 50 years of age might also be youth in some places. Like our politicians, they say they are the young candidate, but if you really look at some of our politicians who are claiming themselves as youth are actually beyond 50. So I mean, for a good cause, maybe youth can be enhanced. It can be even beyond 35. The point I wanted to make is that anybody here who joins this discussion, you can, it's not only when we say youth led, it does not really mean that people who are in their 20s. It means that who you think, if you think that you are youth and you want to take action with youth, with young generation, with the generation that thinks differently, something that we can easily do is that awareness creation. And of course, we do a lot of legal battles. I wouldn't say legal battles are that easy in this country, like in Europe. Like so much of youth goes to various different courts, tribunals, green tribunals, and fight their own legal battles for climate justice, environmental justice, ecosystem justice, biodiversity justice, and under different themes of conservation. And policy changes, what you can do as youth, are so significant and so vast. Like you can do so much of engagement and discussions and driving these institutions, like in this case biodiversity secretariat, climate secretariat, and different other secretariats in this country. We need to pressure them as youth in every possible way, whether it's by way of a petition, or whether it's by way of a letter, or by way of a legal challenge, or by way of a letter of demand, or by way of meeting them, or by way of doing protests, by way of doing any other thing you can do. And also you can get youth involved in various different activities, such as doing reforestations. This is how we got youth involved, or the young kids involved in Rakwana, in one of our reforestation projects. So the young school kids, we get them involved, and we also get university students involved, and we have plenty of volunteering opportunities to offer within our organization, and also with different external institutions that we do, like the ISEC volunteering program, and we do with Erasmus program. Sometimes we also got Yale University volunteers coming to Sri Lanka. We've got different university volunteers coming. Even right now as we speak, we have a good discussion going on getting research volunteering happening in this country from reputed universities around the world. So that we do, and there's so much that we can do as young people, in terms of curtailing deforestation, to creating awareness, to getting young people involved in conservation effort, and limiting the deforestation. And I also want to talk about a few other topics, specifically on the biodiversity conservation. Some of the things that we need to highlight in terms of biodiversity conservation, how youth can take part, and how we can basically, and why it is significant, and why we need to focus more on biodiversity conservation. How can I share my screen when it comes to Google. Okay. Okay. I hope you can see the
Yeah,
screen.
we can
Is it on? Is it on slides?
agreement to action, build back biodiversity.
Okay. Now the this International Biodiversity Day, I just want to talk about a bit on the international scene and what's happening in the world, and finally, so that we have at least about 15 minutes, 20 minutes for Q&A. It's 8:39. By 8:45, I'm hoping to finish. This International Biodiversity Day, the theme is agreement to action, from agreement to action, build back biodiversity. Now, some very important concepts that I want to explain to you. Some of you might be already working in companies. Some of you might be already studying your whatever the topics that you're studying, business or conservation or whatever. It's very important that you know some of these concepts. What we had about 15, 20 years was CSR, corporate social responsibility, for companies and for individuals. Usually they were speaking about a concept called CSR, corporate social responsibility. When you consume things, you have to give back. What you do is, and then it changed to corporate sustainability, much shorter version, where we looked at corporate sustainability. And in the interim with CSR, there was also something called TBL, triple bottom line. Triple bottom line would look at it's applicable for a country, for a company, or for any organization, where they look at their profit, they are looking at their planet, they are looking at their people. So it's people, profit, planet. That's called the triple bottom line. And then came now modern word, I would say, ESG, environmental social governance, where we look at different models of environment, social responsibility, and the governance of a company, where you look at your environment, you look at your society, and you look at your own governance, which is ESG, which is being discussed now. But the most advanced way of looking at it is called regenerative business. In a lot of people in Sri Lanka and in the world are talking about regenerative business now. And in a context where the country, the whole world is talking about, not country, to be honest, Sri Lanka is not yet properly talking about regenerative agriculture, regenerative business, regenerative actions, regenerative economics. We are not talking about it well enough or big enough, I would say. But regenerative concepts have basically come to fore, and a lot of people are talking about it, and regenerative agriculture, regenerative tourism, all of these are very important concepts. And in this backdrop is where we have build back biodiversity concept comes. So build back biodiversity means a few things. It's not just building back biodiversity in terms of flora, but it's also in terms of fauna, in terms of how we can build it back or regenerate our biodiversity. So I think it's very timely that this whole theme of building back biodiversity. What happens is, with, of course, we had a COVID, we had resistance thereafter because of COVID, and then we have climate change impact, disaster impact, and then we also have biodiversity collapse. Now, what do you see as biodiversity collapse in Sri Lanka is that the number of, it's not only the number of highland leopard deaths or the number of elephant deaths that you see on news every single day, but it is also the loss of lot of import means which we don't see. Now, when we used to drive long years ago, like when we were small, in the night, if you drive a van, you have to put so much of water on the windscreen just to wash the insects that got killed because of the wiper or just by hitting the windscreen. But today when you drive, I don't think it's the case in many places. So that is something that we realize in our own lifetime, that the amount of insects got drastically reduced. If you remember, during this is also very important in terms of biodiversity conservation. If you remember, during the power cuts, we had so much of fireflies in Colombo. And the moment the power cuts are no longer, you don't see many fireflies, because fireflies love darkness. They love the darkness, and when they don't have the darkness, they go away. And during the COVID pandemic, if you remember, the amount of birds, the butterflies, and all the other creatures that suddenly appeared in our home gardens no longer are there again, because it was free of pollution. It was so clean. There was not much of economic activity, not much of pollution. We had biodiversity coming back. So the point I wanted to make is that building back biodiversity is not that difficult. It's so easy. It's just that we need to be conscious of what we do. And that is why we say sometimes some of these hotels getting placed in Singaraja, like the Singaraja Eco Lodge. I'm just naming the hotel itself. When they set up a hotel right inside Singharaj and put all the lightings and put all their smoke and everything inside, and what happens is all the insects gonna get impacted. And then what happens, something like Singharaja Aranya Senasane, I'm referring to Singharaja because they built a massive statue and put all the flashlights, and all the insects gets attracted to this light and they get killed, and the insects are killed. So building back biodiversity is very important, and we need to do it consciously. And if we don't do it consciously, it's going to create a huge issue. I hope you can see this again. It's not moving for some reason. Why is it moving? On the last few slides, but why is it not moving? Okay, I think I have a little technical issue. Okay, not moving. I just wanted to show you one other important slide. Can you see it now?
The screen is not shared.
Oh, okay, okay, right. Is it clear now? Is it, can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, right. So this is basically some of the 2030 targets where different solutions are proposed. I'm not going to talk about it much, but I just wanted to show you a few important. Again, this is not moving. I think I'll have to unfortunately read it out to you. So the target, as the last COP is concerned in terms of building back biodiversity, is that we need to protect at least 30% of our land and sea areas by the year 2030. This is the biodiversity targets. And creating vast heavens where nature can flourish and thrive. These protected areas act as a shield, keeping habitats intact, both safeguarding and boosting the diverse species that call them home. Now, 2030 target for the whole world is 30% of our land and sea area. So where that would mean like 30% of the sea area we cannot touch for mining or anything like that. And that is basically the global target going to be. And but I think if I don't show you this screen, finally is not going to. Do you see this for now?
Yeah, we can see it. Forest
Okay.
and resources.
This is about Sri Lanka. We have 3,771 flowering plants, and for you to just understand the the floral diversity of the country. And then we have 348 types of ferns and 566 types of mosses. And then different algae, fungi, lichens, and all of that. 661 lichens. Now Sri Lanka is, I would say, one of the not so much studied place. But if we actually really do a proper study of Sri Lanka, it's so much. It has so much to offer, and it has significant biodiversity for anyone to work, or rather protect and work and keep for future generations. And finally, in concluding the presentation, I've almost passed 5 to 10 minutes of what I initially planned, but finally, deforestation is one of the major issues. Now, when the world speaks of 30% of an area being conserved, in Sri Lanka, we currently have about 70% of a forest area, but we have 30% of a protected area network. Both belong to Forest Department and Wildlife Department. Doesn't mean that that is a forest cover. It is just the protected area network. So we basically have what the world is actually suggesting, but we can actually improve our forest cover, which is the target also, to up to 3% as per the 2030 target. And that would mean that we are creating more safe havens for our wildlife. But unfortunately, instead of improving our wildlife and protected areas and our forest cover, we are cutting down forests significantly. And that is where we come to picture. Rainforest protectors and most of the other environmental organizations today are trying to protect and conserve. LRC, Land Reform Commission, roughly about 20,000 acres of lands, out of which at least about 5 to 10,000 acres are big forest lands. And then you have Mahavalley areas, Mahavalley lands, tens of thousands of Mahavalley lands. For instance, proposed Hambantota Managed Elephant Reserve. That's an elephant reserve that has 60,000 Mahavalley, 60,000 acres of Mahavalley lands. That is where we fight deforestation. And we also have other networks of Mahavalley lands, and we also have lands belonging to state forest lands, where 1/2020 circular, if you remember, a big hahoo about policy changes, where unfortunately a lot of forest lands were almost getting deforested. So these are some of the things that I wanted to highlight. And on the other hand, we also have a lot of conversions for agricultural, maize, and other types of crop changes, including rubber to oil palm conversions. Rubber is a better crop for the country, but rubber convert into oil palm is a bit of a big issue, which has been stopped now by way of a gazette, by way of a government policy. But unfortunately, there are secret plantings that we hear where your own areas. There are 5 districts where the oil palm planting is happening: Ratnapura, Kalutara, Gol, Matara, and Kagalla. And you can get involved if you are in one of these areas. You can get yourself educated on the impacts of oil palm and fight against this and conserve your areas itself. So there's so many deforestations happening, so many degradation of wetland habitats, filling of wetlands, filling of paddylands are happening, and degradation in riverine ecosystems in terms of building dams, so mini hydros to what and what not. So we basically need to get together. Youth need to get together and try and network yourself in conserving our biodiversity and wildlife, and also helping ecosystems thrive. And finally, remember, in your home garden, you can't do anything if you cannot maintain your home garden. Do not plant species, plants, flowers that does not help biodiversity. For instance, people plant rose, anthurium, bougainvillea, and all kinds of things. What do they do? They don't really help any kind of biodiversity improvement. Whereas you can look at some native plant species that can actually help both bees, butterflies, and all of that. You can have a small pond in your place, which will not actually have mosquitoes if you have the frogs coming, butterflies coming, and all types of other fish are there, because mosquitoes can't survive in an environment where there is fish and also dragonflies, because Dragonflies eat 50 to 100 mosquitoes every single day. Did you know that? Do you know small bats, if you make, like, if you have some fruits going on where that fruit help bats, small bats or big bats, like mangoes or papayas or something like that, some other small fruit, the birds and bats love them. And you actually, small bats actually eat hundreds of mosquitoes every single day, and other flies as well. Doesn't mean that they eat big flies like the dragonflies. Dragonflies also eat butterflies. And having frogs is a very good thing. But are we actually doing? Our traditional homes had a water, kind of a ditch or an area where we used to grow all kinds of rampe, kohila and all of that. But we don't have it now. Now the result is that we have overpopulation of mosquitoes because mosquitoes don't. And our small canals and streams had fish, and we don't have fish anymore. Why don't we have probably normal titayas or whatever fish in a small pond? So these are little things that you can do at home. And when you plant plants that will help butterflies, bees, and all the other insects, that will have some kind of a nectar, small amount, at least some nectar that helps these pollinators going. So it's about biodiversity. It's about, my land is about 6.8 perches, in which you name any fruit, you name any kind of importance trees, from meat trees to avocados to mangoes to everything I've got. So in a 6.8 perches, I've got like 20 different types of varieties of plants going, and they're not disturbing others, obviously, and others are also very accommodative. Not every neighbor is bad. So you can actually make your home garden a perfect example as well. That is how youth can help bring back biodiversity and improve biodiversity and also conserve biodiversity. It's not only helping fighting deforestation per se, but it's also understanding what are ecosystem and what services they provide, and also helping and having consciously thinking about the species like the black monkeys, purple-faced langur, and all of that come to my mango tree in Boralaskamo, in this big urban area. I hope that most of you also might have different kinds of biodiversity that you can help having some of these fruit species going. And finally, you inhale about 500 odd liters of oxygen, I believe, and one household uses about 1,500. You're spending about 8,000 to 10,000 rupees on oxygen. You have to spend about roughly about 50,000 rupees in your water. If a leave. Sorry
Yes,
about the disturbance again. So the presentation, I will end up here. Just wanted to highlight that you are indebted to this planet by consuming water, by inhaling, by your breath. So give back something, build back biodiversity. Thank you for listening. And it's the opportunity for any questions based on what I said, or anything that I have not discussed, but you want to clarify from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a really interesting presentation. And there's a question from Shifan. He's from Anuradhapura, and he would like to do a research in Anuradhapura, and he want to know which area issues he have to take. Please give some ideas about it.
Okay, I would say, Shifan, Anuradhapura is a agricultural based economy and an agricultural area. And also in the meantime, Anuradhapura has Vilpattu National Park and plenty of other protected areas. And if you want to do a research in Anuradhapura, I would like to know if it's biodiversity related, then I can suggest specifically. But you might want to take the issue of commercial agriculture and its impact on forests or biodiversity as one topic, because there were different policy decisions that were taken. Like, for instance, Rajanga Nyaya, there is 100,000 acres of lands were proposed to be given for aloe vera plantation. This is one monoculture, small plants, only an export crop. And that would mean like this sparse forest and the shrub forest and other small forest might actually disappear and replace with aloe vera, for instance. So maybe that's one area that you can look at. And maybe another thing is that how the agrochemical and the fertilizer usage in paddy lands in Anuradhapura is impacting the biodiversity. Insects and pollinators is another topic. Finally, I would also suggest another topic. Now, there are so many tanks in Anuradhapura area, and tanks by law has 100 meter or 100 yard of a 100 meter buffer zone. But almost all the tanks in Anuradhapura, including Kalawewa, Nuwarawewa, and all of that, have been encroached, and all these buildings, concrete structures have come in within the buffer zone of tanks. Maybe you can even do a study in understanding the encroachments in tanks and reservoirs or tanks in Anuradhapura and their impact on the tank ecosystems. So these are three ideas that you can probably look at. Okay, we also have a question from Dale Fernandez. Can we answer that also?
Yeah, sure, sir.
What plants attract butterflies and bees the most? Any plant with that produces nectar. So if you look at for bees, what we see in most of our home gardens today is Vatusuddha. Vatusuddha does not have any kind of nectar. But what has nectars are like, for instance, Saman Pitcher and Sepalika, and then you have Acteria, and then you have Balunaputa, and then you have big trees, of course, almost all kinds of trees, like including coconut itself, coconut, mangoes, to many different varieties that produces nectar. And there are some small species, small plants that I had a list. Probably if you can maybe share your email address with me, I'll send you a list of plants that produces nectar. This good kinds of nectar that are supporting bees. And you also know bees love what's this plant which has a thorn that grows very commonly on our grounds, has a purple color flower. Nidikumba also, and you know, the Nidikumba is sold for like $50 a plant in Japan, in some of the other countries. Yeah, I will send you a list of plants, bee friendly plants, Dale. I just copied your email address. Yeah, any other questions that we have?
If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Excuse me. Mr. Jayantha.
Yes.
Earlier you talked about the plantation activities going on around the buffer zones of Singharaja and all.
Yes.
why the authorities, I mean, whoever doing it keeps giving away these kind of areas for such activities? I mean, aren't these areas protected by any law or something?
The thing is this. Now I will have to explain a bit about the differences of laws in terms of Forest Department and the Wildlife Department. Wildlife Department is governed by the Flora and Fauna Protection Ordinance, and the Forest Department lands, protected areas are governed by the Forest Ordinance. For the Department of Wildlife, Flora and Fauna Protection Ordinance have a 1 mile buffer zone where the activities, developmental activities can be controlled by the Department of Wildlife. Say Vilpattu has 1 mile buffer. Anything that you do, you will have to take the approval from Wildlife Department. So they have a mandate, they have a right to intervene. But when it comes to Forest Department, whether it's Singharaja or Nagas, both are World Heritage Sites, unfortunately does not have a buffer zone. What to a certain extent can be governed or can be regulated is by using the National Environment Act, which is the authority enforcing that is the Central Environmental Authority, which says any protected area from any protected forest, 100-meter is demarcated as a buffer zone. But actually 100-meter is not a reliable, not an enough buffer zone for a protected area. So Central Environmental Authority can have a say, but that's not being practiced or monitored. It's very difficult to monitor these things because environmental regulators, both Forest Department and Wildlife Department and the Central Environmental Authority, have their officers here and there, not enough officers, not enough staff. That means that the government does not have significant importance in conserving our forests. That's what it says. So for them, it's difficult to keep an eye on these protected areas and the developments around it. And that is where you and we and general public come to the picture. The villagers come to the picture. We need to keep an eye what's happening. So the planting that I mentioned, that you mentioned, is tea planting, cinnamon planting, oil palm planting, commercial crops, and monoculture crops. Monoculture is one single species, you plant them the whole area. So monoculture is bad. Actually miscropping to a certain extent is good, but yeah. So anyway, the point I wanted to make is that authorities, when it comes to Forest Department protected areas, can't do much. There is a problem with Forest Department protected areas. For that, we'll have to keep an eye. Or we need to push for policy change, law to be changed, which is something we can do. We can write, we can start doing. And these days, Sri Lanka's national forestry policy is being discussed, and we are going to actually propose that also as one of the change that must be done. The act must be changed somehow to be in par with the Forest Department of Wildlife.
Okay,
There's another question. How can we increase the population of fireflies? Can we answer that also, Pasindu?
Also there's another question from the private chat box. If someone sees somewhere happening illegal tree cutting, what are the actions we can get?
Okay, I'll answer that first. Okay, if somebody sees an illegal tree cutting happening, is that what you can do is that any tree cutting, unless it's a home garden and unless it's typically available and allowed tree species, first thing you'll have to get yourself familiarized with protected tree species and tree species that require permits to cut. Like jack tree, you can't cut. Like some of the other tree species that you cannot cut, like Navanda, for instance, was recently removed from the protected list. So you can cut, you can consume, you can use in your premise, but you can't transport it, some of the species. So you need to get yourself familiarized with these lists. Those lists are available online under Forest Department and under different other, if you do a proper search, protected tree species you can find. So if you see a tree species that is being cut that are protected, then you can do a few things. Divisional secretariats obviously Grama Sevaka comes first. Grama Sevakas can be informed. And then comes the divisional secretariat. You can also inform forest department, 911 or something like that. And the Central Environmental Authority, if it's in a major way, 1982, or there is a hotline, you can check hotline, you can do a simple Google search. There is a hotline for the forest department and for the Central Environmental Authority. You can inform them, and you can also write by way of a letter to the respective agencies. These are the agencies that can work on tree cutting. But say if you see a tree being cut roadside or in a forest, then that directly goes to the forest department. If that forest is a forest department forest, or if that forest is a wildlife forest, then it's to the wildlife department. You can give a call on their hotline also. You can also write, you can email, you can use any medium to do that. That's what you can do. But if it's a forest being cut, you can do the same. You can also inform us, like rainforest protectors or any other environmental organizations active on that. And yeah.
There's another question, same as that. Are there any specific policy recommendations in Sri Lanka to promote sustainable land use practices?
Policy recommendation to promote sustainable land use practices. There is a department called Land Use Policy Planning Department. Not many people know about this department. And there is also National Planning Department, NPD. We are not an ideal country, unfortunately, but I would just explain you a bit, because this is a very important question. All of you who are remaining here would like to know this. There is a National Planning Department to plan all kinds of national plans. What is a National Developmental Plan? What is a National Transportation Plan? What is a National Forest Plan? What is our National Biodiversity Plan? All that has to come into the picture in this National Planning Department. It does not happen in this country, unfortunately. There is a department, but it does not happen. Land Use Policy Planning Department is a separate department under the Ministry of Lands, if I'm not mistaken. Land Use Policy Planning Department should plan how our land's being used. They need to plan where we should keep our forests, where we should use our lands for BOI zones or for industrial zones, where we should use our lands for transportation, where we should use our land for national parks or for tourism, where we should use our lands for airports, ports, harbors, all of that. Land Use Policy Planning Department has a relatively good plan where agricultural plans be and all of that. But unfortunately, it's not being properly enforced. Land Use Policy Planning Department have also identified catchment and watershed protection areas, which is very good. So it's in a way looking at proper land use, sustainable land use policy. But when it's being implemented, these plans are not considered by the respective departments. So this is where we need to actually should have a proper agenda and a proper plan for the whole country, which is governed by the National Planning Department, which I believe is under the Ministry of Finance, where everything is planned under the Ministry of Finance. Every project comes, everything that comes, every agricultural plan, every conservation plan should abide by this National Planning Department and land use policy, sustainable land use policy that should come under the Land Use Policy Planning Department should be the way to go ahead for the country. So your question was, any ideas for sustainable land use policy? There is a land use policy, there is sustainable component in it. The problem is that it's not being implemented. I would suggest that we have a central body that regulates all these land use policies are being used properly and in line with our SDG 2030 agenda, and in line with our net zero 2050 agenda, and in line with our biodiversity goals for 2030 and beyond, and in line with our zero deforestation policy by 2030. That is, I think, the way to go ahead. I think I answered your question. It's not the ideas and suggestions. It's actually implementing what is already there, and there is some good thoughts given into the land use policy planning already.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. There's a question for how can we increase the population of fireflies?
Fireflies, yes, the question we took earlier, we considered earlier. Now, fireflies love the darkness, in a sense, like they love to live in, dark areas, and in kind of within, like greeny leafy areas. That is where the fireflies live. And fireflies also eats, like I mentioned, mosquitoes. That's another thing, a very important thing. And fireflies are also both very sensitive to lights and sensitive to pollution as well. So if we have a home garden or a forest area where there is fireflies already, like I mentioned, in Colombo, there is enough fireflies still. Just the fact that they don't have enough darkness for them to live, because there is no use of their lighting fire as long as there is too much of light. So I think making an area greeny leafy area with all kinds of grass and all of that for them to, this is not small grass I'm talking about big grass. They love big grass also. And would be one way that we can basically help the firefly population. You don't really have to increase the population per se, because they eat a lot of things that we don't have to actually give them food or anything like that. It's just that you need to make a certain demarcated area, not like the whole place. I know there can be like depend on the area you live in, maybe you'll have to have some lighting going on, but then if we can leave a dark area for these fireflies in your home gardens or in your village, if there is a forest that should not be disturbed, it's pretty actually good that they will it will help them. So you don't have to do anything specifically. Like I mentioned, during COVID and during the power cuts, we had hundreds and hundreds of fireflies in our garden and everywhere. They all just need that a little bit of darkness for them to do their regular activities. And of course, bats and all of that. As for bats, I just want to mention that it's very important. You have to plant fruits that bats eat, and also you need to you can have bat houses. In there are bat cages that is, I'm not quite sure in Colombo where you have them for sale, but in some other countries, like in states, for instance, buying bat houses is a habit. Like you for bees, you keep a big collar, like a big pot somewhere in a dark greeny covered place, so that the bees will make their nests. And you can do that for bats also. But in addition to fireflies, I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, so another question there is, how can young people get involved in conservation efforts in Sri Lanka individually?
Sorry, could you kindly repeat?
Yeah. How can young people get involved in conservation efforts in Sri Lanka individually?
I didn't hear the last bit. How can the young people get it individually?
Yeah.
Well, I already mentioned individual conservation efforts. It starts from your home. If you're not concerned of your home or your own vicinity, your own home garden, your own consumption, then there is no way of You trying to conserve things that are out of your control in most cases. Switching off unnecessary lights is a very basic thing. Less consumption of electricity is a very easy thing. And less consumption of plastic and polythene is an easy thing to do. Can have your own biodegradable, or I would say your own Jiva Kotua. That's where you put all your organic garbage into, where it naturally decays and produces fertilizer. Have it on a corner of your garden with all these glaciaria sticks stuck on the ground in a rounded shape or on a square shape, and you put all your garbage in that. And that helps soil worms, earthworms, and all kinds of worms to appear. And they are really good. And you also have your land monitors coming and mixing all the garbage, and then all the garbage. If you give your organic garbage to your waste driver, unless you have like a very small land, I have 6 perches, I have my own fertilizer that I make and this natural way. So if you do that, then it's a crime, because that's something very simple that you can do. And there is no bad odor, nothing bad happens, no noise, nothing. If you do it yourself, you cannot give your organic garbage. So that's looking at your waste and not buying polythene and all of that, carrying your own bag to shops, supermarkets is an easy thing to do. Like I mentioned, power saving, energy saving, water saving. Don't waste water. Very easy to do. And most importantly, you can actually plant animal-friendly plants at your place. It can be big trees, it can be small trees, it can be shrubs, it can be small plants, whatever it is that helps animals. Like akkapana. If you want butterflies coming, plant akkapana. Akkapana is very easy to plant, and akkapana is very common. Akkapana is a herb. Akkapana is something that you can eat. Akkapana is something that hosts butterflies so easily. Balunakuta is very easy to plant and very nice also. Both bees and butterflies can feed on it, and there is a good nectar on it. So these are little things that you can do instead of planting all these exotic, beautiful, whatever plants. They say lucky plant, that plant, and all of that. That does not have any return to biodiversity. Plant something that's good. So these are some of the things that you can do. Very easy to do, and very easy in terms of doing your own conservation individually as young people, as young kids. You can do that at school also. You can do that at home garden. You can do that on your probably spare land, whatever available, roadside or whatever, and in your home, in your school. These are little things that you can do. Pasindu?
Okay, since we are running out of time, we have come to the end of today's session. I'm sure everybody learned something new today. With today's knowledge, I hope everyone
just one quick answer. What is the difference between Debara and Bambara? What are their English names? Do they make honey? Okay, both makes honey. Right. Not only there is bees, and there are hornets, and there are bumblebees, and there are 2 other different types of similar to bees. I think it's Janit who had asked the question. Janit, I want to mention you. Let me explain this in Sinhala. Me messo eka jatiyak, kaneya messo කියලා ඉන්නවා තව ජාතියක්, බඹරු දෙබරු කියලා ඉන්නවා, කනෙය මැස්සෝ වගේ තව මැස්සෙක් ඉන්නවා, මට මේ මැස්සගේ නම මතක නැහැ. මේ ඔක්කොම පැණි හදනවා. හැබැයි මිනිස්සුන්ට බොන්න පුළුවන් මිනිස්සු පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ මී මැස්සෝ පැණි තමයි වැඩිපුර. බඹර පැණිත් පාවිච්චි කරනව නැත්තේ නැහැ. හැබැයි අනිත් ඒවා පාවිච්චි කරන්න අමාරුයි. දෙබරගේ අමාරුයි කොහොමටත්. දෙබරගේ ඒක නිකන් අර අමුතු මේවක හදන්න ඒක මිනිස්සුන්ට ගන්න බෑ. බඹර නම් අර ගස්වල බඹර කපන අය ඉන්නව වෙන මේගොල්ලෝ ඒක ගිහිලා කපන්න දන්නවා. ගස්වල එල්ලෙන්න හදන්නේ. දෙබර හදන්න ඊට වඩා වෙනස් විදිහකට. මේක තමයි වෙනස. I just wanted to mention the differences. The kaneya, the small bee kind of a thing that also has honey. And now actually at my place on my mango tree, there is a kaneya, the small bee honey kind of one. It's almost the size of honey bee, and also it has honey. It's there on my tree. Most surprisingly, I saw it like a couple of weeks ago also. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, that was really interesting. And I guess everyone learned a lot of new things today. So thank you so much, Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha, for sharing your knowledge and time for us. It was really interesting topic and really interesting talk. So let's meet again with another workshop. See you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. Good night.
Good night.